Okay, so get this right. What if you could get a computer to translate something from French to English, but you never actually taught it French?
Huh.
Sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that is what's so wild about this research we're diving into today. These researchers at OpenAI, they trained a language model
Hmm.
that's so powerful it can do all these tasks that it was never specifically trained to do.
Yeah, like what?
Like translation, obviously that's what we were just talking about,
Yeah.
but also question answering, even like summarizing stuff, all without any specific instructions.
Wow. So it's like you never taught it to do it and it can just do it.
It's like if you taught a dog to fetch, but you never showed it a ball, it just somehow knew.
Wow. That's incredible. It really does make you think differently about how AI learns.
Yeah, this research paper, it's called Language Models Are Unsupervised Multitask Learners. And it was a huge deal. Like it blew the doors wide open for what we thought was even possible with language.
I can imagine.
So to really get into it, let's meet our star player, GPT-2.
Okay.
Now, GPT-2 isn't just some average language model.
Yeah.
This thing's more like picture a supercomputer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's eaten the entire internet.
It ate the internet.
Yeah.
So we're talking 1.5 billion parameters. That's how big this model is. It's like imagine giving a computer program a billion knobs and dials to adjust while it's trying to understand language.
Wow.
And the data it was fed, this is the crazy part. This wasn't some like carefully curated thing. It was this huge chunk of the internet, a data set they called web text. And it basically captures everything that's publicly available online.
It's like the Wild West of information.
Exactly.
So instead of training GPT-2 on specific skills, they basically just let it loose on this mountain of data.
Oh, wow.
And they gave it one job and just predict the next word in a sequence.
Kind of like that game where you finish each other's sentences, but on an epic scale.
Exactly.
And it worked.
It's kind of like that, but way bigger. And what they found just blew their minds. GPT-2, by becoming like a master of language itself, could suddenly do all these things that its creators never even thought about.
So they didn't program it to do these specific things. It just learned how to do them because it was so good at understanding language.
Exactly.
That's incredible. And this idea of, what is it called? Zero-shot learning. Like usually you train a language model to do one thing really well, like translate, but GPT-2 could do it all: translate, answer questions, even summarize text, all without any specific training. It's nuts.
It's seriously wild. So, okay, let's break it down a little bit. Let's start with translation. You mentioned they didn't teach it any languages, directly.
Yeah.
What kind of results did they actually see?
Well, even with, they had some non-English data, but it was pretty limited. Even with that, GPT-2 was able to do a better job in some of those basic translation systems out there, especially for French to English.
Really?
Yeah, and it got, get this, an 11.5 BLEU score, which I know that probably doesn't mean much to you, but
It
basically
means nothing to me.
it means the translations weren't, perfect. But for a system that never actually learned French grammar or vocabulary, it was surprisingly good.
So you're saying it's like it absorbed French just by hanging out with enough English text?
Exactly. That's the power of looking at patterns on a massive scale. GPT-2 was able to pick up on these subtle links between languages, just by analyzing how often they popped up together in its data set.
Wow, that's wild. Okay, that alone is pretty mind-blowing. But I'm even more intrigued by this whole GPT-2 answering questions thing. How is that even possible if it's never been trained on, a question and answer data set?
Well, it's like, imagine, right? You feed this computer a zillion trivia questions with all the answers,
Okay.
and then you test it, right? But with totally new questions it's never even seen.
Okay, so kind of like a pop quiz for a supercomputer.
Yeah, exactly. And what's wild is that GPT-2, it could actually give you the right answers, and not
Yeah.
just randomly, way more often than if it was just guessing.
So you're saying it's like it picked up some basic common sense just from reading, the entire internet?
It's true.
That's a little spooky when you really think about it.
Yeah, and it kind of shows that these big, huge, massive language models, they aren't just memorizing everything.
Right.
They're actually starting to get it, grasping the connections, the meaning behind the words. They're building some basic understanding of how the world works.
Okay, but that brings up a really big question for me. How much of what we're seeing with GPT-2 is genuine understanding,
Yeah.
and how much is just crazy good memorization?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Right, because if it just memorized every single book and website, that's not as impressive.
That is a really important point, and the researchers, they were thinking about that too. They really wanted to figure out, like, is GPT-2 just a parrot? Is it just mimicking what it's seen, or is there something more going on? Like,
Right.
is there actual comprehension happening?
Yeah, so what did they find?
Okay, so they did this analysis, right? They compared GPT-2's answers to that original training data, that huge chunk of the internet we were talking about.
Right.
And they wanted to see how often is it just spitting back stuff it's already seen.
Right, word for word.
Exactly. And there was some of that, for sure.
Yeah.
Some memorization. But it wasn't enough to explain everything GPT-2 could do.
So it wasn't just a parrot mimicking what it had seen a million times.
Nope. Definitely something more interesting happening there. A much deeper level of processing, maybe even some understanding.
Okay, this feels like a good time to talk about the Gettysburg Address, because it's just too good of an example to skip.
Right.
The paper mentions that GPT-2 could actually recite the Gettysburg Address, like word for word.
Oh, yeah, it's true. They gave it the opening lines and it just went for it.
And that was it. But here's what's even more crazy. It could nail the speech for a while, but then it would go off script.
What?
Yeah, like it would start making stuff up.
No way.
But it sounded like Lincoln, but it's totally original.
So it's like it remembered the speech and then got bored and started freestyling.
It's both amazing and kind of creepy at the same time.
For sure. But that's what's so cool about these large language models. They aren't just these like static things.
Yeah.
They're learning, they're adapting, they can generate new and creative stuff, all based on what they've seen before.
Okay, but where do we draw the line then?
Where do you mean?
Like between clever imitation and actual understanding.
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And that's what everyone's trying to figure out. How do we actually measure something as complex as understanding in something that's not human?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, definitely keeps you up at night.
So if GPT-2 wasn't just this super-powered memorization machine, what was it then? What made it able to do these zero-shot learning things?
Well, one thing's for sure, size played a huge role.
Really?
Yeah. The researchers found that as they made the models bigger, they just got better at like almost everything.
Interesting.
It's like there's this threshold, right? Like a certain amount of computing power, data, and then boom, it's like they unlock these crazy capabilities.
So in the world of language models, size does matter.
It seems that way, yeah. It's actually a lot like what we've seen in other areas of AI, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, often making the models bigger, giving them more data, that's what leads to those big breakthroughs.
Like the old saying, go big or go home.
Exactly.
Okay, but seriously, where does this all leave us? Like, what are the big implications of all of this research?
Well, for one, it makes us rethink how we train AI. Like, if we can build models that are just really, really good at understanding language in general,
Yeah.
maybe we don't need to create a separate AI for every single task.
So instead of an AI for translation, one for writing poetry, another for trivia, we could have this mega AI that just does it all.
That's the dream, right?
It's both really cool and also kind of intimidating. Well, I mean, what happens when AI can not only understand us, but also, like, talk back with the same kind of fluency and complexity?
It really makes you think about the future, right? Like,
Yeah.
the future of communication, creativity, even what it means to be human.
Totally. If a computer can write a novel that's as good as one written by a human, what does that mean for art?
Exactly. It's a lot to process, and these are the kinds of questions we need to be asking ourselves as AI keeps getting more advanced.
Well, that's why we do these deep dives.
Yeah.
To explore these ideas and try to make sense of it all.
Totally. And the paper itself, it ends with this idea that unsupervised task learning, where the models just figure stuff out without explicit instructions, that's the future of AI.
Wow.
It's a pretty big claim, right?
Yeah, it is.
But just imagine, if we can actually unlock the full potential of unsupervised learning, we could have these AI systems that don't just do a bunch of different tasks.
Yeah.
They could figure out new tasks, stuff we haven't even thought of yet.
Okay, now we're getting into science fiction territory.
Right.
So GPT-2, as cool as it is, it's obviously not perfect.
Yeah.
The researchers talk about how fine-tuning, basically you take a model like GPT-2 and you give it some extra training for a specific job. And that gets you even more impressive results.
It's true. It's like taking a student who aced all their classes and then giving them the chance to really dive into a subject they love. They're already starting from a great place.
And they're going to be unstoppable.
Exactly. And in AI, that kind of specialization, that could be huge. Like, imagine what that could do for medicine, engineering, art.
Everything. But the paper also ends with this note of caution.
Well, yeah.
Well, they say that as amazing as these large language models are, we need to be careful.
Right.
We have to understand their limitations, especially when it comes to biases.
Right. We don't want to accidentally create something that's harmful or dangerous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like that old saying, with great power.
Comes great responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if that power is, a language model with billions of parameters.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but my head is spinning.
Mine too, a little bit.
It's like we started with remember. That feeling you get when you see AI do something almost like too human.
Right.
And now we're talking about the future of AI and what it means for, like, all of us.
That's a lot to think about, that's for sure.
It really is. And it makes you realize this research, it's not just about some new tech.
No, not at all.
It's like it makes us rethink what we even thought was possible.
And what it means to be human, even.
Exactly. And the craziest part to me is that this is just the start.
Oh, absolutely. We're just getting started.
We're talking about AI that can write poems and translate languages and answer trivia questions.
Right, and we're already seeing those things.
So what happens when we take it even further?
It's the big question, isn't it? What happens when we build models even bigger than GPT-2, with even more data than we can even imagine right now?
Right. Will these things just keep getting smarter? Or is there a limit?
It's honestly hard to say, will we hit a wall or will we be blown away by what they can do? I'm kind of excited to find out.
Me too, but it's also kind of scary, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Because this isn't just some sci-fi movie.
This is real life.
And we have a responsibility to make sure we're doing this right.
I completely agree. We have to think about the consequences.
Yeah, like what kind of future are we creating here?
Right. It's not just about building powerful AI. It's about building it responsibly.
And making sure it benefits everyone.
Absolutely.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It really has.
I feel like we've gone from 0 to 60 trying to wrap our heads around GPT-2.
From how it learns to the ethics of it all.
It's a lot, but it's so important to talk about this stuff.
It really is, and it's not over.
No, this is just the beginning. We're going to keep seeing incredible breakthroughs in AI.
And probably some setbacks, too.
But one thing's for sure, it's going to be an interesting ride.
I'm ready for it.
Me too.
And on that note, I want to thank you, our amazing listeners, for joining us on this deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Keep those brains working, keep asking those big questions, and we'll catch you next time.